Which is better, a thought leader, influencer, or subject matter expert? Wrong question. I'm Ashley, and I'm the author of Human-Centered Marketing, How to Connect with Audiences in the Age of AI, and I'm going to join this Hitchhiker's Guide session to talk about why and how to work with different B2B creators in the marketing mix. I hope you'll join me. Marketer, writer, and speaker by day, and a singer, actor, and fitness fiend by night. And you're actually about to find out something about me that maybe most people don't know, and that's I have a guilty pleasure. And don't worry, it's safe for work, fear not, but I'm going to reveal to you a TV show that I watch that is my guilty pleasure. And it is this one, America's Sweethearts. So for those of you who don't know, this is a docu-series on Netflix about the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. And I've actually been watching this show since it was making the team on CMT, if any of the rest of you are DCC fans. And so one night, random Tuesday, I'm watching my guilty pleasure show. We've got America's Sweethearts on, and I kind of bolt up in bed at something that is said, and it's this. So we have Kelly, who is the director of the DCCs, and it's audition season. And so she's introducing the judges. And so she says, we've got Kevin here, and he is a wellness and lifestyle thought leader. And she kind of stumbles over this word, thought leader. And she looks at him and she says, I'm not actually sure I know what a thought leader is, right? And so she looks at Kevin, and this is his response. He says, you can ask my publisher who wrote that, right? So I've got my guilty pleasure show and my guilty pleasure topic right in the same thing. And it gets me thinking, right? What is thought leadership? And the reality is, apparently nobody knows, including Kevin, but I do. And I have to tell you, this is quite serendipitous. This has been in the making since 1996. Yes, that is a young Ashley dressed as a DCC, and now it's coming full circle 30 years later, where I am getting to talk about thought leadership based on the DCCs. So let's talk about what thought leadership is, what it is not, and what types of people and creators we need to use as thought leaders. So I created the 4 pillars of thought leadership, and they are credibility, profile, being prolific, and depth of ideas. And so normally what we'll see is that thought leaders are actually strong in all 4 pillars. Most people start from the bottom and they work their way up. And so you'll see here, there's 2, both the depth of ideas and the profile pillar, where they've got 2 things highlighted. This is basically, most thought leaders are starting to move from kind of that field level recognition up to being a big company celebrity, a celebrity in their field, more well-known. And then from a depth of ideas perspective, moving from kind of new strategies all the way up to being, pioneering and visionaries. So thought leaders are not the only B2B creators, right? So let's talk about subject matter experts, influencers, and thought leaders in the marketing mix. So first, we'll start with our subject matter experts. So how they help is, looks like we've lost our slides. Sorry about that. Nadia, do you mind re-enabling slides for me? Perfect. Back in. So how they help. They tend to help you explain how to solve problems, troubleshoot, and educate on our existing solutions. That includes the existing problem space and the existing solution space. And they normally help drive medium and long-term usage goals. So here's what they look like across the pillars. So they tend to have very strong credibility because they've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. They're deep in the space in terms of the products, problems, and solutions. And because of that, they actually tend to be quite strong in the depth of ideas. So this is really about the new, novel things you're saying. And so because they're so well-versed in the problem space, they're actually really great at coming up with new strategies, structures, and processes. The problem is most of their knowledge is locked either in internal, dashboards, internal systems, or kind of in a one-to-one or one-to-few customer or user situation. So from a profile perspective, they're not super famous, they're not sharing externally, they're not very well known outside of the company. And then from a prolific standpoint, they're not writing, speaking, publishing externally. They might be doing a lot for their specific job and their specific team, but they're not sharing externally. Next, we'll talk about our influencers. So influencers tend to help you reach a new audience. They can help drive short-term awareness goals and then longer-term sales goals. So here's how influencers tend to score. So they have to have some credibility in the problem and solution space. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any influence. And these are the people that you tend to think of as famous, right? You've got Instagram influencers, you've got YouTube influencers, you've got LinkedIn influencers. And so they tend to be quite well known. They have a large social following, or they're able to draw a big audience at in-person conferences. But from a prolific standpoint, they tend to be focused on a single channel, and they tend to be focused on one, maybe two content types. So as I mentioned, if you've got an Instagram influencer, they're primarily focused on, let's say, creating reels on Instagram. Or if you have a LinkedIn influencer, they're primarily focused on creating text posts or carousels on LinkedIn. And from a depth of ideas standpoint, they tend to be focused on existing solutions, but maybe they're able to find kind of the net new thing from a tactics perspective, but they're not really inventing new things. They're not really creating new products, and they're not really exploring different types of problems. They're not really on the bleeding edge. They tend to be more early adopters of existing solutions. And then finally, we have our thought leaders. So these folks focus on the new conversations, the new ideas, the innovation, the novelty in the market. They're expanding not only the solution space, but also the problem space. So they tend to help educate the market, they build trust for the company, and they can help drive long-term impact for sales, partnerships, recruiting, investing, and affinity goals. And again, here you'll start to see it's really hard to get to the very top of all of those pillars, particularly being super famous outside your industry and being visionary. So you'll start to see those folks moving up throughout each of those pillars. So usually your thought leaders are going to be treated where their expertise and their authority is considered the source material. They're going to be very prolific. They're doing podcasts. They're writing long form and short form content. They've got a strong following in multiple social media places. They're doing podcasts, right? They're speaking both to customers. They're speaking to investors. They're speaking generally to the industry. And then in most cases, again, it's really hard to start getting up to that visionary level. So they're inventing new tactics. They're inventing new strategies and structures. And in some cases, they're pulling together information, tactics, and processes from adjacent fields to basically combine that in a new way. So this is always the question, right? Which one of these is the best for the marketing mix? Spoiler alert, it depends, per usual. So here's the thing. A lot of people think that thought leaders are the best B2B creators, or they say we need to do thought leadership for our founders. We need to make thought leadership for the company. And everybody really hones in on this idea that we need to do thought leadership. But thought leadership is really hard. And as we just discussed, they help you reach different types of audiences. So first, to determine the best type of creator for your marketing mix, start with your goals. And this sounds very obvious. Have mismatched metrics. It says I need to reconnect, so I will pause till that happens.
I think you're good, Ashley.
Oh, I'm good. Perfect. All right. So what outcomes are you trying to drive, and what metrics will you use to measure? And you need to be matching those metrics with your actual intent. So if you have a buy intent, sign up, activate a free trial, pay, bill, whatever it is, that is a very different type of conversion than something that's like, watch a video or join a webinar. All right, next, who is the audience? Are they internal and external, and what are their pain points? So as we just discussed, a lot of the times your subject matter experts are very specifically engaged with your existing users and customers. Those people have a very different set of pain points if they're already very familiar with the problem space and they're exclusively using your solution versus someone who's maybe net new to the problem space or has just discovered that they need a solution in this area. If we think about AI as an example, right? 2 or 3 years ago, nobody was talking about AI, let alone any specific tools, prompts, agents, use cases, workflows, etc. So the folks who are at the forefront of the AI evolution, we're actually having to educate the entire market about this whole new problem space and solution space. That's very different than where we're at now, where you've got people who are recommending specific tools, prompts, or use cases. And then finally, gaps. So what gaps do you have in your content? And then what capabilities do you have in-house or via your agency partnerships? So if you have no one in-house who is very good on camera, who's good at speaking, who's fast at writing, it might make sense for you to partner with an influencer who has those skills. If you got a boatload of people who are excellent at doing the research, codifying the research, then it might make sense to really lean into enabling those people to write, speak, record, share, etc. So be honest about who you have from both an idea generation and codification perspective, as well as who you have from a talent perspective. So if we compare these B2B creators, here's a quick snapshot. Your SMEs, yes, I say SME, not SME, but your subject matter experts, primarily are focused on internal audiences. And internal audiences includes your customers and users as well. They tend to focus on existing problems and solutions. The metrics that they help drive are really usage and adoption metrics of the products, and then they can help drive those metrics in the medium and long term. Influencers tend to focus on external audiences, but they do focus on existing solutions. So not necessarily just your products and services, but the existing solution space. They can help drive awareness and sales in both the short term and the long term. And then our thought leaders. These folks are focused on both internal and external audiences. They focus on new problems and solutions. They help you build trust and affinity, and it's a long-term play. So let's talk through how to pair with each of these B2B creators in the marketing mix. First, let's talk about our SMEs. So a couple of common pitfalls. First is forcing them into a box. So I see this frequently where you've got somebody who's super smart, maybe they're sitting on the solution engineering side or the customer success side, and you're like, we need you to talk about this thing over here, right? And we need you to do that exclusively on LinkedIn. And often you'll find that these people are like, I don't really want to share externally. I actually don't like writing. I kind of hate LinkedIn. And now you're making me regurgitate marketing content. So like, you're going to have me post something on LinkedIn that a marketer wrote? Like, I don't want to do that, right? So you force them into this box where they're just having to regurgitate the marketing content. On the flip side, you might actually have some folks who are super excited to share externally, but they don't quite know how because they're not fluent in that skill set. And so pairing them with a marketer would actually elevate their profile and their ideas for both them and for the company. So as we think about this, that leads us to our next pitfall, which is this one and done approach, right? Maybe you've got one person who is willing to speak at a conference, and then you're like, great, go speak at the conference and you're done. You don't actually turn that content into modular content or into campaign content to continue to get that long tail distribution. So how do we think about using our SMEs in the marketing mix? For folks that are less inclined to speak externally and build that broader profile, they're actually great as internal reviewers and editorial contributors. So I've spent most of my career doing developer marketing. And so this particular audience is very interested in dealing with their peers. They don't want to hear from a marketer. And so being able to pair a writer or a marketer with someone who has a developer title or a product management title actually works better for both credibility with the audience and the quality of the content. And so giving those folks a byline, having them internally review it to make sure that it's accurate and has enough depth, and then giving them an editorial contribution helps both you and the audience. They're also great from a customer engagement standpoint. So because they're so well versed in the problem space, they tend to enjoy dealing with the gnarliest problems or gnarliest engagements with the customers. And so they're great in more of a one-to-one or a one-to-few setting. And so they tend to sit in customer success or solution engineering if you're dealing with that more technical audience. They're also great at creating sales training and demos. Again, they hear directly from the customers and they're very familiar with the problems and solutions. So they can equip your sales team. They can create demo environments. They can create things that are very specifically for the company and scripted because they're so close to it. And then finally, working with them for company-hosted user conferences. So having them staff a booth, having them present at something like if you're Salesforce and you run Dreamforce, having those folks present the product demos. They're very comfortable with that because they're not having to come up with a bunch of net new ideas, and it's stuff that's in their wheelhouse every day. So I'll give you a real world example. This is my colleague, Andrew Boyaji. And Andrew's a little bit of a unique case because he's actually an excellent speaker and writer. And so when he first came to Atlassian, this is what his profile looked like. He'd been in the industry managing large teams, large deployments at large companies for 20 plus years. He is an expert. People trust him both in terms of his peers and in terms of the people he's trying to educate. And because he's been in the industry so long, he was actually able to come up with new strategies, structures, and processes. The problem was he had basically no profile and he was not prolific externally. He was not writing, he was not speaking, he was not sharing on social. And part of that is because he was in a regulated industry. So he worked in the banking industry. And you can see here, this is some screenshots from his time just before he came to Atlassian. He had fewer than 1,000 followers on LinkedIn. And you can see his content, like, you think I've just duplicated the screenshot. I have not. He basically published kind of the like, we have a job opening. We need a new person, right? And that's all he was allowed to post on LinkedIn. And so because of that, he didn't have a strong following and he wasn't prolific externally. Once he came to Atlassian, though, he wanted to start writing and speaking. And so like most subject matter experts, he first started enabling our internal teams. And so you can see here, here's a couple of screenshots of demos, updates, overall kind of information about the problem space and how our solutions fit into the problem space. These things were shared with our product managers and they were shared with our sales and marketing teams. Slowly but surely, we started to have him post on our owned channels. So he posted on the Atlassian blog. He was featured on the Atlassian YouTube, doing different demos of our developer experience platform called Compass. And then he started to share that content a little bit on his LinkedIn. So again, it was very company focused and it was very focused on our products and solutions. And then slowly but surely, he started to speak more, both at our internal user conferences and also staffing booths at external conferences. So again, starting to build that profile, starting to build that muscle. And then things started to really change, right? Andrew started to say, I see that we need to make this change from an industry perspective. We need to change how this conversation is going at an industry level. And so he started to come up with some net new frameworks. He came up with this idea of the complexity limit for different teams. And so we started to feature that content not only on Atlassian properties, but also third parties. And so today, Andrew is actually now a top voice on LinkedIn. He's got over 10,000 followers. He speaks at external conferences and he's quoted in external press. And so he's actually kind of passed the baton of this subject matter expertise to the rest of his team. And so he's actually now our customer CIO. And so he's our field CIO, where he's officially now this spokesperson because he wanted to be. But he's got other folks on his evangelism team who are still filling that subject matter expert, reviewer, internal, speaking with customers, building demos, etc. And so here's what his profile looks like today. Again, he maintained that credibility in the industry. He's still definitely focusing on strategy, structures, and processes, but he's now gained that field level recognition and he's sharing more. He's speaking and he's writing more. And as you can see, he's built that following on LinkedIn. So Andrew's a perfect example of somebody who originally started in that subject matter expert bucket. And we kind of partnered with him to say, hey, do you want to become an influencer? And he said yes. All right, let's talk about working with our influencers. So influencer marketing is having a whole moment. You've probably heard of the creator economy. You've heard of influencer partnerships, and in large part because of AI and LLM visibility and where those systems are pulling from, including LinkedIn, including Reddit, et cetera, influencers are becoming a bigger part of the marketing mix. So a couple of pitfalls. First, focusing on only those folks who have a big following. The raw number of followers on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, et cetera, is not as important as the match between the audience and your goals. Can they actually reach the people that you want to reach, not just full volume? Next is forcing them to only share company content. And this is true whether you're talking with internal or external influencers, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But part of the reason influencers have so much credibility and influence with their audience is because they're seen as authentic. And so if they just start becoming a shill for whatever company or brand partner they're working with, they lose that credibility because it's not seen as authentic. It's basically just like, oh, somebody paid you to make a product announcement, right? We have an outlet for that. It's called advertising, and you can pay a celebrity to read a script, right? Next is a short-term or transactional approach. So this is a pitfall that I see, and I think it's less prevalent now, but I do still see it where it's like, we basically want to pay someone for one post. If you're pricing your influencer partnerships, offers with a one-off post or a per post contract, you are missing so much of the value, right? Pairing with these people over the long run, giving them a sneak peek of the products, letting them shape how you create your products and services because they are part of the audience you want to reach, that is going to give you dividends versus just saying, hey, I want to pay you to create a post, right? That's similar to hiring Michael Jordan to be on the Wheaties box. That's a completely separate set of goals and time horizons. And then finally, the last pitfall is ignoring your internal influencers. So assuming that the only people who can share that company message or who can share and help talk from a topics and themes perspective is people who sit outside the company. So let's compare our internal versus external influencers. From an expertise standpoint, your internal influencers are often aligned to the product or services from the company. So Andrew is a perfect example of someone that became an internal influencer. External influencers, their expertise is aligned to the target audience and the topics in the industry. From an employment standpoint, obviously, your internal influencers are employees of the company. External influencers are non-employees. These could be customers or users, or they could just be folks who have influence in the industry. From a relationship to the brand standpoint, your internal influencers become the face of the brand versus external influencers have a limited association with the company, and they may work with multiple companies from a brand partnership perspective. And then finally, your content mix. So internal influencers have a mix of craft and company-related content. So in Andrew's case, he came from that developer and CIO background, versus external influencers are almost exclusively industry or craft-related content. So a marketer, right? An HR person, a developer. All right, key criteria for choosing our influencers. And this is true for both internal and external folks. First is having shared values. Do you trust these people? And some of this stems from the pitfalls that we talked about of only wanting to focus on company-related content or being forced to seek approval for every single asset. Most of that goes back to not having shared values. So you need to have trust. These people should already generally be kind of engaged in the problem space at minimum. Next is a passion for creating and engaging. So don't go out and try to force someone, particularly an internal influencer, to join a platform where they don't already spend time or to do things that they don't like to do. I say that I am no longer in the business of convincing people to do anything. If you do not want to create, if you do not like hanging out on a platform, if you don't actually enjoy engaging in comments and direct messages and speaking on stage, why am I trying to convince you to do that, right? So find people who are already excited about doing this work. Next, the audience and brand alignment. So again, in some cases, the pitfall of finding somebody with a huge following, but that following might not actually be relevant to your niche, your products, and your services. So making sure that these people are already engaged. We see this a lot, again, particularly in the developer community. Are they already writing, speaking, hanging out, talking about different tools? And even better if they're already using your tools, even if they're doing that kind of privately or on behalf of their company. And then finally, content and distribution skills. So are they fluent in the skill of creating the type of content and distributing it in the places where you want them to do that? So don't ask a YouTube influencer to suddenly start sharing on LinkedIn. Don't ask a LinkedIn influencer to suddenly try to share on Instagram. If somebody is very fluent in creating video content, don't ask them to write you 10,000 word ebooks, right? If somebody is primarily focused on long form written content, don't immediately ask them to create video content, right? So matching the actual format and channels correctly. And again, if you're strong in a certain channel, internally, you might actually want to focus your external influencer efforts on formats or channels where you're weak. So if you're very strong already at creating mid-form written content on LinkedIn, you might actually want to go find a YouTube influencer or an Instagram influencer or a TikTok influencer to help you with your video. So let's talk through some examples of internal and external influencers. This is Tyrona Heath. She works for the LinkedIn B2B Institute, and she is an excellent example of an internal influencer. Here's her profile. She has unquestioned knowledge of source material, and I would actually say she's starting to move into that expertise and authority being treated as original material, in large part because the B2B Institute does a lot of proprietary research. And so that dovetails very nicely with her depth of ideas in terms of new strategies, structures, and processes. She's also got field level recognition, and she is primarily focused on building on LinkedIn. She also speaks quite frequently and does a number of podcasts. And you can see here, she's got over 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. Overall, she's obviously very associated with LinkedIn, but you can see that she's done some personal branding for herself as well. If we go look at her content, you see that she's got a mix of videos where she's appearing on behalf of LinkedIn and where she is interviewing or appearing on behalf of herself. And she does blend her personal background and expertise with what she brings to LinkedIn. So this is an example. She actually got a chance to interview Michael Johnson, who is a world-class sprinter and an Olympian. And she did that on behalf of the LinkedIn Collective. But part of the reason that she was so good at interviewing him is because she actually had Olympic dreams and ran in the Olympic trials for the 800 meter. So she's blending that personal and that professional. She's got that credibility both from her own background and expertise and with the halo of the brand of LinkedIn. You can see here, she's writing, she's speaking, she's on LinkedIn, she appeared at Inbound, she's speaking at Digital Cut in a couple of weeks, she goes to a number of conferences, and again, she presents a mix of research from LinkedIn B2B Institute, but also infuses that with her own personal brand. Next is an external influencer, Sarah Stella Latenzio. And I will say Sarah would cringe and would never call herself an influencer, but I am calling her that, again, because of how she scores across the different pillars. So very similar profile to Ty, where she's got that unquestioned knowledge of the source material, field level recognition. She primarily builds on LinkedIn. She actually just recently launched a newsletter a couple of months ago, and she has started to speak at more external conferences, but she is primarily focused on LinkedIn. And then she does a mix of strategies and structures as well as tactics. And you can see here, she's now this actually, I think she's got more like 50,000 followers now. But again, this nice mix of personal branding and lots of followers on LinkedIn. And you can see her content gets a ton of traction. She's in some cases getting thousands of reactions, hundreds of comments. Her content really resonates. And one thing that's interesting is it's really hard to differentiate between her influencer content or her brand partnerships and her normal content. So these are some of the results that she's gotten. And you can see here it says SEMrush partner in the hashtag, which is basically how she notes that this was a paid post. But the reason that this content resonates so much is because you can solve the problems based on the tactics and strategies she's giving you, regardless of whether you buy the tool. So she's just using the tool to show something where she's already an expert. She would normally use these tools in her day-to-day work. She's well-versed in all the ways that you can use the different types of tools and competitors in the industry. And so the reason this content resonates so much is because it's useful regardless of whether you actually buy the tool. So Sarah has a number of brand partnerships and folks that she's working with, and she is an excellent external influencer that helps people solve problems because she's got that credibility. All right. Finally, we've got our thought leaders, right? So a couple of common pitfalls. First is misunderstanding thought leadership. So Thought leadership is not quality content. Thought leadership is not founder or executive content, right? All of your content, yes, even the sales content, should be high quality. And founders and executives share a lot of types of content that is not thought leadership, right? The company earnings results or the updates to the investors, that is not thought leadership. That's just a statement of fact. So just because an executive says it does not automatically make it thought leadership. Thought leadership has to drive the conversation forward, has to be new, innovative, etc. This leads to a second pitfall of focusing only on executives, right? The assumption that we need to do thought leadership for a founder. That's not how this works. These people have to actually have thoughts, right? The true definition is have thoughts, be a leader. And so in some cases, your founders or executives might not actually have the credibility with the audience because they're so far away from the problem space. They're so busy running the business. They're so busy managing everything and keeping everything stable and moving forward at a nice, steady pace. Then in a lot of cases, they either don't have time to have the thoughts, they don't have time to codify the thoughts, or they might be so far from the problem that they lack credibility with the audience. So don't focus exclusively on your executives. And then finally, outsourcing the content creation. So whoever is having the ideas, doing all of the research, codifying all of that information and distributing it, that person is the thought leader. Don't just slap someone else's name on it. They will be found out, particularly if they're out speaking or they're on podcasts. You know if somebody does or does not actually know what the heck this thing is about from a topic perspective, a problem perspective, a depth perspective. So this is particularly true from an AI perspective, right? AI can be used as a ghost writer. It cannot be used as a ghost thinker. And the problem is, whether it's a human or a robot, a lot of people want a ghost thinker. And that is not how this works. The ideas have to originate with a person from their expertise, from their experience, and from them wrestling with solving this new problem. Once they've actually put that into, let's say, a format, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's just dictating into an internal set of responses or AI GPTs, that can then be turned into long form content. You can parse it out, but it has to originate with a human. So one of the things I talk about, and this is a page that I've made internally for Atlassian, we use Confluence, obviously, to do this. But anytime I'm working with someone who is going to be a thought leader, we start by talking about content depths. And there are three: conceptual, strategic, and tactical. So conceptual is kind of the theoretical, philosophical nature. It focuses on the what and the why of the idea. Strategic focuses on the process, tools, and key knowledge components that have to be in place to make that conceptual idea a reality. And then tactical, these are your specific exercises, your prescriptive step-by-step instructions to make the strategy and the concepts into reality. So if we take this presentation, right, I kind of started with this overarching idea that you need to use different B2B creators in your marketing mix to achieve different results. From a strategic standpoint, I then gave you a number of frameworks, including the 4 pillars, the snapshot of how different creators help you. And then from a tactical perspective, this is exactly what we're talking about: the worksheets that you can fill out, the questions that you need to ask, nitty-gritty things that you can do to work with these different types of creators to solve this problem of trust, credibility, conversion, etc. Next, we talk through outlets and influencers. So part of being a thought leader is actually having that field level or above recognition. And so you can't be a thought leader in a silo. You have to actually partner. And so anytime I work with folks, we think about what are the press outlets or conferences where you might want to speak, who are other influencers or voices in the industry that you might want to pair with for speaking engagements, panels, work that you want to build on or cite to show that you've really thought about, here's the existing problem and here's how my ideas are different. And then finally, thinking through the personal brand. Again, I assume you will get a copy of this deck after the presentation, but feel free to make this a big screenshot and take a screenshot. But I always ask folks, how do you write? How do you speak? Are you quippy? Are you formal? How do you dress? Do you have a signature color or a signature item? You wear a scarf or a hat, or Steve Jobs always wearing his black turtleneck. That helps people recognize you and helps you stand out. Thinking through, accessibility, right? Do you let people pick your brain? Do you respond to coffee dates, etc.? So I will end with one last example. This is Nancy Duarte, who does rank as a thought leader. And I would actually put her very high on all the pillars. You know, she's got the expertise and authority. She's frequently cited as a person who has originated these thoughts and frameworks. She is the CEO of Duarte, and obviously she is well known across the storytelling space. She is very prolific, as we'll see here in a few minutes. And then from a depth of ideas perspective, she's introduced a number of different frameworks and tactics and strategies and is really driving that industry forward. So some details on the credibility pillar. She has been in the industry for over 30 years. She runs an agency. She's worked with some of the biggest names in tech, nonprofits, and a number of other disciplines. She's also has built quite the profile. So she's got over 200,000 followers on LinkedIn. She is a top voice. She's also built a strong presence on Twitter/X, over 50,000 followers there. And she's been on a number of podcasts. She's spoken at TEDx. She's been featured in Harvard Business Review, right? Like she is well known in top tier industry outlets. She is very prolific, you can see. She's written a number of articles. She's been on podcasts. She frequently posts on social media. And then you can see here from a long form content perspective, she's written numerous books or co-authored multiple books. And then finally, from a depth of ideas perspective, all of the assets in her books are based on net new frameworks. And in particular, this secret structure of great talks, this is a framework that she put together early in her career that has spawned multiple TED Talks, podcasts, books, etc. This is well known and well used across workshops, and it's been featured in university content as well. So, no, that's a lot to talk about in terms of all of the B2B creators, but it turns out there is not one best person in the marketing mix. Evaluate your goals and choose the right creator for you.
Ashley, that was fantastic. I actually read your book, and in this little thing right here, my little notepad where I was scribbling all the notes for every chapter. That's how I read books. I either do it on the margins or in my little thing, right? I called out these things where you said thought leaders, and that's kind of the pinnacle where I think a lot of people want to get to, do not just post quality content. They do not post just executive content. They do not post stuff on why we made this product. It's not product marketing content, and it's not being contrarian, which I think on LinkedIn, that's the rule of thumb. If you're contrarian, you're going to create all of this storm and people will engage and the LinkedIn algorithm will promote you. And then you said thought leaders change minds. They balance lofty ideas with actionable insights. Comment on that, because it's quite a combination. And to find a person like that, I don't know, it's like, looking for a shooting star.
Yeah, it is definitely difficult. And I think the hard part here is that so often marketers are the folks who are trying to drive this. And they're like, we need somebody with a credible voice in the industry. And we think we have a unique point of view on how to solve the problems. The struggle comes when you immediately try to convert that into sales. And it's like, okay, then that becomes the thinly veiled sales pitch. And so, and this is part of the reason why I actually think working with kind of those internal subject matter experts, they tend to not have a focus on buy intent actions. And so they're kind of genuinely almost idealistic about like, no, we just want to solve problems. No, we just want to serve customers. That's the mindset shift. And then when you pair them with marketers, yes, you can polish it up. You can make sure it's got a proper distribution strategy. You can streamline how that content gets created and distributed. And then sure, on the metrics side, you can start to then say, if you believe that you have this problem or you think this is where the industry is going, you might find it helpful to partner with us. But it really is that mindset shift of educating and empowering the audience to take action in a new direction. On the flip side of that, I also see folks doing lofty things where it's like, we're going to invent this net new problem that nobody's ever heard of. And it's like, okay, is that grounded in reality? Can your audience actually take action on it? Is a problem that they actually have? So you see it on both ends, people either going towards the sales pitch side or towards the kind of like lofty academic PhD side. And so it is hard to find that balance.
I also noticed, and I've been guilty of this myself, because the thinking usually is, who is your thought leader? That's your top guy in your company, because clearly they know how to lead the company. So you take your C-level person, in a lot of cases your CEO, you plop them on stage, and that's your brightest and best out there preaching to the industry from the pulpit, right? But what I've seen in a lot of cases, and it's like, I do not wish this upon anyone. It's the cringiest feeling where you just want to drop through the floor. You're like, oh, he's just lost on that stage, or she's lost on that stage. There's no energy. They're looking for the next thing to say, and you could feel the audience is just tuning out, and you're thinking, oh my word, this was my brightest and best, but what does this mean? So there's like that disappointment, there's that letdown feel. And I think that's because when you put that person up on the stage, you did not evaluate them on all those pillars with the energy, the dynamic, the kind of ownership of the audience, and being able to own the room. Do you ever see that, or do you ever talk to people who kind of have the same problem? Because I definitely saw it more than one time.
Yeah, so there's two things on that. One is a pitfall is putting such a premium on that title and being unwilling to change someone's title. So if that's the issue, you've got this excellent person who's maybe at a director or VP level, and the press or the conferences only want to speak to the C-suite. Great, give this person a title. And I actually think in the kind of developer or technical world, that's why they have a field CTO, a field CIO, right? They actually have somebody who is good at doing all of this expertise, like speaking. They have, they can write, they can speak, they have the depth of expertise. And that's one way, is like, give them the title they need to actually do the work in that case. The second piece of this is being willing to have an honest conversation. And I've been in rooms where it's like, hey, Ashley, can you help us do some speaker coaching? And I come in and I'm like, guys, like, realistically, this person is not gonna get there. So I understand that we need to be out speaking on this topic. Here are 3 other people who are excellent. They are already writing, speaking, sharing. Change their title or change their role and scope, and or give them the brand halo. Particularly for larger brands, that brand halo carries a lot of weight. And so if the brand says Nadia is the person to speak to, Nadia is the person who talks about this, we're going to boost Nadia. It doesn't matter if you have a C-suite title or not. The industry will see the quality of your ideas, your ability to connect with that audience, and the brand pushing you. So there's a little bit of this where it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that if the only person the brand puts forward is someone with a C-suite title, regardless of their ability to actually convey the message, they stop getting invited, they stop getting quoted, right? Like, they stop being able to kind of be in the room, and the brand is just beating their head against the wall. And so we can put all of that effort towards elevating someone else who's already got some of that natural ability or natural desire. It's a hard problem to solve. You are not wrong. It is a hard problem to solve, particularly if the rest of the leadership team is not willing to have those hard conversations about what we actually need from an ideas and a spokesperson perspective to move the needle.
There was a song out there, it was Meghan Trainor who sang it. It was not one of her top hits on the radio, but it was called Title. And it was a girlfriend asking the boyfriend to give her the title. But anyways, it just came to mind. I'm like, titles matter. Titles matter because it's up and people pay attention.
Yeah.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. I got a couple of slides that I actually pulled from a CMO coffee talk. It was a presentation within the 6 Sense community. I can't remember who it was that was presenting it, but I feel like it's very relevant to this topic. And they kind of outline, maybe from a different lens a little bit, but I feel like it's complementary to this. Like, what is that influencer mission when you go out there and, let's say, thought leadership, we just discussed, it's, within your company in a lot of cases, and it's deep expertise. If it's influencer and you're going out there to recruit, right? What are those things? The one thing that stood out to me on this slide, like, yes, they have to be familiar, they have to know, like, the context, right? All that makes sense. And, do a good job, mention you frequently, all the SEO benefits, all the LinkedIn benefits. But having the experience in the industry and the type of organization that your organization cares for. To me, that was the one thing that stood out, because in a lot of cases, people go and hire someone, for example, in the B2B, I don't know, development space, for example, right? And those people work for a small startup, but the company's trying to break into enterprise. So they don't really pay attention to a person with a following in the startup kind of tech bro world. Is that something that you also kind of touch on when you recommend kind of the right fit between influencers and companies?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing here is that influence with the ICP. And this is something I think it's a little bit of a struggle, because people often look at the B2C world or the D2C world. So they'll look at someone like Mr. Beast, right? And they're like, Mr. Beast has a million. Yeah, on YouTube, he's got 100 million subscribers or something, right? And it's just like, that guy is not your guy for selling, accounting software or fintech software or insurance or whatever the thing is, right? Like, he's not your guy. And one handy thing, which again, this is not kind of the core stuff that I run these days, but there's a whole thing about nano influencers, micro influencers, macro influencers, mega influencers, right? And at a certain point, when you cross over into the mega influencer territory, you're actually crossing over into celebrity. And so you can hire celebrities, right? And that's great, but celebrities serve a completely different purpose. It's almost more of a gimmick than it is that they are actually influencing. So this is a completely different tactic in the marketing mix. So perfect example, Inbound frequently, the conference frequently gets these insane speakers, right? They've had both Barack and Michelle Obama. They just had Reese Witherspoon. They just had Amy Poehler, right? Those people are huge draws for registrations, butts and seats, whatever, right? The reality is, no one thinks that Amy Poehler knows anything about like SaaS CRMs, right? However, she does have, a production company. She runs a business. She's interesting to talk to. She knows about storytelling, right? So she's interesting to listen to, but like, I would not take any advice from Amy Poehler about how to set up my HubSpot CRM, right? Like her telling me the difference between HubSpot and Marketo, like, it's not happening. So I think that sometimes people get blinded. They're like, but it's Amy Poehler, it's Reese Witherspoon. I love both of them. They're excellent. And I loved hearing their fireside chats and Inbound. But in terms of them actually influencing me to purchase anything, like, that's not happening because they don't have credibility. So, celebrities do have their place, or mega influencers do have their place, but from an actual influence, not just reach or gimmick standpoint, you do need to find folks who actually have that credibility with the audience.
So I actually have a slide here. We'll cover 2 more slides in the interest of time, but I have the slide here where, again, this is not my art. I just borrowed it because it seemed like it fits, and I'm citing it duly. The magic quadrant version of the influencer world, right? Where you have the reach on the bottom, that's your x-axis. And then you have the relevance, that's your y going up, right? And it was interesting to me when we talk about the noise and the celebrities, to your point. So celebrities have way more reach, for example, than your tech bros, the loud voices, right? Where there's a lot of them because there's a lot of startups all trying to find their, place under the sun with a huge megaphone. But on the relevance scale, these people do not get to the point where you have here they call them BFFs, right? People who are doers. For example, in the MOPS world, I can think of Sarah McNamara. She's a great doer. She knows her stuff and she influences people and, other operations professionals like her because she helps them solve problems. So her relevance is much higher, even though, to your point, Reese Witherspoon probably will draw way more people to an event. But what shocked me here is that thought leaders with expertise in the following, they're so far in between. There's so few of them out there.
Yeah, it really is true. And this is why I say, adjusting the thought leadership. I, as you saw in my book, I have some like nitty gritty, numbers for some of these things. And the reality is you have to adjust it to your industry. So if you're in a particularly niche industry, you might actually be able to be a thought leader and be high on that profile pillar with 10,000 followers and like speaking at the three big industry conferences that are like the industry conferences and appearing in the 5 industry publications. Like depending on the size of your industry, that might make sense. Obviously, I'm coming at it from a tech lens, a SaaS lens. And so you've got to definitely have, tens of thousands of followers. You have to speak at lots of industry conferences, right? You have to be quoted in lots of different kinds of press. There's probably hundreds of podcasts that you could be on that would count as top tier podcasts. So it really does depend on the industry, and you have to look at it in the concept and scope of the industry. It's kind of interesting too, because like from an academic standpoint or a PhD or hard sciences standpoint, most of those folks, like publishing is a big deal for them, but it's such niche publications that they don't actually have the reach. So it's a completely different, like you have to adapt this to your industry to make sure that it's relevant in terms of size and all of that. But yeah, the thought leaders are definitely few and far between.
And then the last point I wanted to bring up, like, I love how you have the structure to help people assess, like, I have this person, where do they belong on this, in this chart, on the scale? How can I, what expectations can I have for them? What can they potentially get me in return for all of their engagements, right? I was actually at a company once where we went out and we bought Octopost, which is a social tool that helps you to boost all of your social posts out there within the company. So if you have an initiative where you want to pre-write posts for your subject matter experts, hoping that you can tap into their LinkedIn network, you can create 3 versions of the post with the angle that your company needs, right? And then these people being users within Octopost, they can go ahead and, put those posts on LinkedIn because it would be connected to their personal account. And the idea is that you have this amplification effect from all the multiple people within the company spreading social posts, which are relevant but different. So it doesn't seem like they just reposted, right, to all of the different groups. But to your point, what we found out, not everybody has the even desire to do that. And then some people in specific functional roles, they're like, well, we are as a company in this industry, but I am a marketer. What we are doing is irrelevant to my audience. Why would I repost? So this initiative kind of fizzled out. I mean, it was a great idea, but the fit clearly was not there. But I'm sure there's people out there trying to boost this thought leadership. But what stood out to me on this slide is how many layers there are that you have to think about when it comes to thought leadership and influence to actually do what you set out to do with this whole thing to get to your decision makers. And in this chart, it's the yellow people in the middle, the DMs, right? Decision maker 1, 2, 3, the whole buying group. I mean, you have all of your competitors on the outside, which is the noise. And then you have other niches. You have your analysts, you have your media and PR, you have your industry associations, more so in some manufacturing, for example, or government, those are industry associations heavy. Then you have your consultants, then you have your Gartners, Foresters, everybody else who is talking about you. Like that just expands this world that you got to be thinking about, in addition to influencers and thought leaders.
Yeah. And I think the other one thing that's interesting about this chart, I guess, is, and I think a lot of people get caught up on channels, formats, and narratives and interchanging those. And that is a pitfall, right? From my perspective, you should actually be starting with those narratives. And that's where the conceptual, strategic, and tactical comes in, because not all narratives lend themselves to all formats and all channels, right? And so once you know, here's my audience, here's my goals, here's the things that we need to talk about where we've got a unique perspective, we are uniquely qualified to advise on this. And then you can start to match that with your different intent. So we didn't get into all of that here. Obviously, these primarily focus on thought leadership primarily focuses on kind of trust intent or affinity intent or true learn intent. But there's also use intent, buy intent, and help or remediation intent. Then you can start to say, okay, who is the right person to tell this message? Do they sit in-house? Are they external? What channels are the right places for us to put those in, matching the channels with the people? But I think too often companies start with like the person or the channel, and they're like, we need to be on 20 different channels. We need to have an influencer in every single channel. And it's like, well, what are you saying that needs to be said in these channels by these people, right? And so going all the way back to the goals, the audience, the outcomes you're trying to drive, the narratives you're trying to tell. So it's kind of interesting because I see like socials and media, then it's like consultants and analysts, and it's like, oh, you're starting to, there's a little bit of like channel and human swapping going on in there. And so I think being clear about your narratives, your channels, and your formats, and then people, having those be very clear so that you're not conflating them is helpful.
I love this idea of what are you doing after all and why? And starting with the why, back to Simon Sinek, right? Like, what's your why? Ashley, I am super grateful. I'm humbled. I'm in all of your expertise on this topic.